The International Newsnet World Report is a national television news show available in more than 30 million homes. We broadcast daily real news the networks won't tell you. We are solely viewer-supported. That means you. You can donate at our website, INNWorldReport.net. We hope you find the following interview informative and helpful.
Friends, he created quite a stir with his first book in November of 2004. Shook the activist world, certainly, with his book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He's here back again now on INN for the third time with his new book. We'd like to talk right now with John Perkins and his new book, The Secret History of the American Empire. John, welcome back to INN.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here again.
Tell us a little bit about the buzz from the first book and how it led into this second book.
Well, you know, the first book, it was rather amazing in that it got rejected by 29 publishers, all the big guys, primarily because they were afraid of it, I found out since. And then a small publishing house, Barrett Kohler of San Francisco, picked it up. And then very quickly it shot to the top of the list, and it spent over a year on the New York Times bestseller list. And things just took off after that, and I found myself suddenly out there on the speaking circuit in a big way, and Penguin bought the paperback rights to that book, and now has brought out this book, which I wrote, The Secret History of the American Empire. One of the things that happened as a result of all the hullabaloo over Confessions was that many other economic hitmen, jackals, government officials, assassins, various people like this kind of came out of the woodwork and came to me and gave me their confessions, told me their stories, which I decided needed to be included in this book, some of them. And also out of this evolved what I consider to be a very, very viable, realistic plan for turning all this around, for bringing this country around to where I think it should be, so that it values those principles that I grew up to believe are what will make America great, and also what will make this a good place for our children and all future generations to grow up in. I think we need to create a stable, sane, peaceful, and sustainable world. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that for our kids here in the United States is if we do it for children all over the world, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East.
So it sounds like you were quite buoyed by perhaps the unexpected success of your original message. I remember writing a piece, actually writing a review on the book, and I titled the book and you as The Missing Link. We had heard so much about both ends of this various scheme that goes on involving economic hitmen. You were one of the first, I think, to come forward and really describe how things are done. And I remember at the end of the book you were saying that you were hoping that some of the other people in this system, economic hitmen, jackals, and so forth, would come forth. You want to tell us about one that you include in the book?
Well, one story that to me personally was very interesting was that in the late 70s, a nation known as the Seychelles, which is off the coast of Africa, right, and is associated with Diego Garcia, which is one of the U.S.'s most strategic Air Force bases, very important Air Force base. In the late 70s, the president of the Seychelles, his name was James Manchin, was very pro-American. He was overthrown in a bloodless coup by Francis René, a socialist, who then threatened to spill the beans on Seychelles, what we had done to get that air base built there, which was pretty awful, some of the things we did, and to kick us out. And so we decided that Francis René had to go. I was brought down to Washington, and there were a series of meetings at the Army and Navy Club with retired admirals and generals who now all work as economic hitmen for consulting firms. We were looking at what we might do to get me into the Seychelles and to corrupt Francis René, to bring him around. There's an interesting side story there in that one of the generals noticed at a cocktail party in Washington that a high diplomat from Seychelles, his young wife, was not very happy. He didn't see him. So this general arranged for a protege of his, a young man, a young economic hitman, to seduce the wife. And he came back in one of these lunch periods and he said, he looked across the table at me and he said, you know, John, he said, the women economic hitmen have it a lot easier than you guys. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, this young man is making inroads with the diplomat's wife, but she needs to be convinced that he loves her. And he said, you know, I would give the keys to the Pentagon to a good-looking woman for a little sex. I don't need to be convinced that she loves me. But I guess that's the difference between men and women.
Well, you did mention, certainly in the first book, that there is all types of weapons in the arsenal, shall we say, to subvert not only governments and high individuals in governments, but even the individuals themselves who get drawn into the system, as your own personal story is laid out in the book.
It's true, and sex plays a very important role in all of this. In any case, the young man eventually had success, but the message came back that Francis Rene was not corruptible, that he was not going to come around.
Now that presents a big problem to this entire scheme of things. It means that things have to be escalated to the next echelon.
It does, but it also meant that nobody needed to waste my time by sending me over there and mucking around to try to make it happen, because it wasn't going to happen.
That way.
That way. And so, of course, I'm pulled off the case. I know that the next step is to send in the jackals. I don't know what that's really going to involve. I don't know what's going to happen. A little while later, I watched on television in horror as what actually did happen unfolded. And what happened was we sent in a team of assassins from South Africa, 45, 46, I don't remember the exact numbers, it's in the book, and to not only assassinate the president, but also overthrow his entire government. And we had a force of all African force stationed in Nairobi, Kenya, to fly in and take credit once this assassination team had done their job. They would disperse quietly, and nobody would know that they were there. Everybody would think this was a group of African.
More of an indigenous type of a situation.
Right. The whole African continent had basically gone against Rene, but. It never worked out that way, because the attack group, the assassin team, was discovered at Mahi Airport, at Seychelles Airport. A guy with a gun on him was discovered, and a huge gunbattle broke out. And this team of assassins was surrounded by perhaps 1,000, they estimated, people defending Rene and closing in on them in the airport. And later, I would become good friends with one of the leaders of this group. I didn't know him at the time, the assassin group, and he told me that it was one of the few times in his life where he felt he wasn't going to make it out and had time to think about it. That he'd many times been faced with, near death, but he always just had to react. This time he had time to think about it. Anyway, to make a long story short, the longer version's in the book, eventually in Air India 707 asked permission to land. The assassin team granted the 707 permission to land. Even there's a firefight breaking out all around them, but the Air India plane couldn't see it happening. Landed, and the team hijacked the airplane, flew it to Durban, South Africa. So I'm watching this on television, and seeing all this unfold. And the plane is surrounded by South African security forces. The would-be assassins give themselves up. They're hauled off to prison. They're sentenced to various sentences, like execution, whatever. And that's what the world sees. And,
You mean once they return to South Africa?